All right, we are live, everybody. Welcome to the show here today. That still does not have a name, so please drop down your name suggestions in the comment below. Let us know if you think of a cool podcast name. Otherwise, we're going to continue without a name. My name is Yasser Bransky. I'm the founder and CEO of Lonico and your host for today. And I've helped digitally transform businesses of all shapes and sizes, from publicly traded, multi-billion-dollar international organizations to local nonprofits and everything in between. And just like you, I'm wondering where artificial intelligence and this disruptive technology that we've seen dominate headlines last year fits in and how. And that's why we've created the show, to bring on guests of all levels in all types of businesses and talk about AI and its business adoption, but strictly from a non-technical lens, meaning that we'll be touching on topics of strategy, process, people, emotions, all of that sort of thing. So if you're curious about AI and its business impacts and challenges, then this show is for you. And we're going to try to drop the corporate jargon as much as possible, keep things as simple as we can. Now, today, I am joined by Norm Poynter, who is the managing director at Asset Management Advocates, a New York and Calgary-based organization. Now, Norm is a very special guest, at least for me. So we worked together at Nexen Energy, which is now CNOOC Petroleum North America. I was working with the operational excellence team. Norm was leading some of the internal improvement groups for maintenance and reliability, and we worked well together. But he kind of took on a mentorship role for me. And I always say that there were 3 people at Nexen who were instrumental in me quitting my job and pushing me to pursue entrepreneurship, and Norm was one of them. So I wouldn't be here. You guys wouldn't be here at all if it wasn't for somebody like Norm. So thank you, Norm, for being here with us today. How are you doing, man?
Hey, good, yes, and yourself. Thanks for those kind words. I mean, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure those years working with you and to see you grow. And I mean, we're roughly 20 years apart in age, so I'll be sitting in my wheelchair and you'll still be working, which is a nice thought, actually.
I'll be pushing you, man. No worry. I'll be pushing you around the park, right? So worry about that, right? So, but look, let's kind of get to some of the questions that we have here today, right? So Norm's got a very interesting background. He started out as a mechanic and a programmer, and he runs a successful consulting firm, right, specializing in asset management. He speaks all over the world as well, right, when it comes to SAP, enterprise asset management, data hierarchy, and all of that sort of thing, right? So let's start, I think, just with the basic thing I want to ask most people here, Norm, which is, what does AI mean to you, right? How would you define that?
It's a tough one to define because there's a lot of influence in the market or in our social media feeds trying to define it for us. And so for me, I don't really believe that AI in the true sense of the term actually truly exists. I think we have artificial narrow intelligence, or we have large language models that have a degree of intelligence, but again, it's a narrow intelligence. And I constantly try to go out and search, and I'll even ask Chat GPT questions like that and, see what response it gives me back, because that's probably the most collated set of data to give a response like that I'm aware of. I mean, short of Googling and getting 1,000 or 10,000 or 1 million or 1 billion responses. But to me, AI is we have to continually improve our practices with respect to our domains, meaning for me, it's plant maintenance or maintenance reliability. And we've been stuck on some very simple problems in that space for a long time, mainly master data, planning and scheduling concepts, and the ability to eradicate engineered in defects in equipment has been problematic since the concept of reliability-centered maintenance came out back in the 50s and 60s, right? So for us not to take a look at something like, as a society, that AI offers, which would be to expedite solutions to some of these common problems we have, I think would be short-sightedness. Now, what does it mean? You know, you and I've talked about this a little bit in the past. I'm sort of an if-then-else kind of guy because of my programming background. You know, I started when I was 12, programming on a Commodore VIC-20. I remember begging my parents for a computer. Back in those days, you were going through the Sears catalog when it came out at Christmas time and looking for something, and there was a Texas Instruments little computer that was much cheaper than a Commodore. Begged for that. They finally got me a Commodore VIC-20, but my neighbor had a Commodore 64, and of course I was very jealous of that because he had much more memory than I had. But the element of programming then was, well, it was all if then else, unless you were trying to figure out machine code, and then it was zeros and ones. So to me, AI is a large if then else string of decisions that are coming to a conclusion, storing that conclusion, and then comparing it each time. So if you run into that condition again, you get another conclusion that matches, and you get a positive statistical response that then influences some sort of decision in the future. So maybe that makes sense to some folks, maybe it doesn't, but I don't think AI, as I started this conversation, can truly think for itself yet and can truly exist without that if-then-else construct somewhere in the life cycle of its origin.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense to me, Norm. So you've obviously seen things evolve, and you've been part of various digital phases, right? Obviously, since you were 12, getting yourself involved in computers and zeros and ones, everything that you're talking about there, right? So how is this wave, right? I'm going to call it the AI wave, right? That I know it's been around for a while, and machine learning is not anything new. But at least since last year, it's just dominated headlines in every single space, right? Every single conference you go to, there's some sort of talk about AI. If not, it's typically predominantly AI, right? So how is it different? How is this wave different than some of the previous waves that have come before it?
Well, I guess it's a little more real now, although we're still seeing it, especially in my space, we're still seeing it as a marketing term, and companies are saying, well, we have an AI, we've embedded AI. And if you lift the covers, of course, it's nothing more than I just described. It's an if-then-else construct that is arriving at a solution, right? I think Chat GPT clearly has changed that game because it's readily available to everyone. And, I started out on the free version. I quickly upgraded to the $20 a month version. And I would say that I use Chat GPT daily for some purpose, right? Now, I was never great at math. I failed Math 30 with a 30%. I dropped out of it because I just wanted to paint cars. So I'm like, I'm never going to need math. So I got out of that. So I was never very good at math. Ultimately, I had to take it 3 more times to get into the program I chose at college. But nonetheless, that's a bit of another story. I used Chat GPT yesterday to confirm some calculations that were in a spreadsheet that I didn't quite think were right, or I didn't understand the formula. So I put it into Chat GPT for confirmation. And so I think that is the big difference today from, years past, is there was always promise of something, machine learning or some language around that concept. But today it's real. There's something there that you can actually physically use and touch and get a result from that can support your work and accelerate your solutions. So just as a segue or an example of that is in 2018, I was at the Australia conference for Mastering SAP, Plant Maintenance, and Supply Chain. Paul Kurchina and I gave a presentation on the future, and it included AI. And in 2018, that was pretty theoretical. Now, the sad thing is that I didn't pay attention to anything after that. Like, I did that presentation and I moved on because I didn't believe in it. I didn't believe that really in my lifetime or in the near future that I would see anything related to it. The funny thing is that this past year, I did another keynote related to Chat GPT, which we can talk about. And I had to go back to that 2018 presentation. And I was like, oh boy, whoops. I didn't take my own. So, I ate some crow there because NVIDIA, for example, was part of that presentation. And well, we all know where NVIDIA stock is at these days. I even went to Palo Alto with Paul, I think it was maybe early 2019, and we visited NVIDIA, and I didn't buy their stock, right? So I guess that to me is the life lesson that says sometimes you got to believe, and sometimes you got to pay attention to what the hype is and make your own decisions versus just ignoring it because you think it's simply that hype, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I like the point that you're bringing up, right, about it feeling tangible, because that's exactly what ChatGPT did. It made it very accessible to people and put it in front of a human to use it however they choose to use it, right? So it's interesting to see how things have evolved. I wish I bought some NVIDIA stock early on as well, man. I think all of us, looking at the way that things are in the market now, wish that we would have done that, right? I think one of the things with this wave that's crazy to me is just how quickly things are accelerating, right? And how many new uses and new applications, and I don't mean like the actual software applications, but I mean more the applications to our daily lives or to whether it's professional or personally speaking. I find things new every single day, man, and I find new ways to use it every single day. And sometimes it's the technology that gets better. Sometimes it's our understanding of how to use the technology that gets better. Sometimes it's a combination of both. And sometimes it's just asking and trying to figure out, like, and kind of exploring, messing around with it, right? So what is you obviously, you did this new chat in Australia, which had a funny name to it when I first saw it, right? So it was Norm versus AI.
Yeah, Norm versus Chat GPT. It was kind of like a stump the chump session. And I was the chump.
So tell me more about that.
Well, I think what we wanted to do at the conference was the conference itself, the structure of it, and I've been going to that conference every year since 2006, aside from, the COVID year or two, and Australia was hard to get into, and then there was another year I didn't go, but I've been there for years. I don't know why I didn't just say that rather than that long meeting. But it was the same old, same old. There was really nothing on the agenda that spoke to this wave of change that's occurring with technologies like Chat GPT. So we decided that we should do something kind of fun and, crazy. And of course, I'm typically up for some public humiliation on stage. So I said, okay, sure, let's do this. So what that did, and I always encourage people, and I think I've encouraged you in the past, Yasin, to go out and speak at conferences, because what it does is it forces you to really know your subject well, and maybe it pushes you out of your comfort zone and you end up in a space where you have to learn. So at the end of the day, it's a win-win for you and for the audience, because the audience wouldn't have heard what your knowledge is if you didn't go speak, and you wouldn't have gotten that knowledge unless you had some experience behind it. So that's what it did for me. When we laid out the title, it was like, okay, oh boy, what is this going to look like? So I started to actually use it with some data that I pulled from one of our joint previous customers, actually, and analyze that data, analyze text basically to see what's embedded in the text. Because in my space and in SAP, there's a data object called long text, and it's basically what it describes. It's infinite text that a user can put into the system, but nobody looks at it. Nobody pulls it out and analyzes it. It's difficult, right? It's either you come up with a library of words to apply against it in a loop, and you try to pull the words out and then figure out if there's any meaning behind it. or you have to do it manually. Well, with Chat GPT, you can feed that text in and say, hey, analyze this for me. Find all the words that are maintenance related. And it goes through and does that. And then you can prompt for more detail or send it in a different direction. So that's what we did with that. I stood in front of the audience and first off said, how many people have heard of it? Well, everybody raised their hand. How many people are using it? We felt that question actually would have a very low response. But quite interestingly, there was a large number of the 600 people in the audience that said, yes, I'm using ChatGPT. And then the next question was, well, how many people are actually using it at work? And then the number went down, right? And then, okay, well, how many people are using it to analyze data? And then we got down to the point where there was like one person raised their hand. So then I just did a little demo with it and demonstrated what was possible, and then talked about how that could transform our current thinking, which is, well, let's ask someone to pull a drop down and populate a data field. And that's for the purpose of equipment history and tracking what happened to that asset over its life cycle. But the ironic part of that is that the history that we've been collecting for years could actually propose statistically what is the likelihood of what you're trying to identify today. So instead of asking someone to be a data capturer, we could ask them to be a data validator, which is a much more valuable role in an organization than just someone doing data entry, right? And that was the real message from that session was if we shift and if we use this technology and the mounds of data that we have to predict or to propose, then we start to use the tacit knowledge that is in an individual and we start to make it more explicit in the organization. So that was sort of the message in that session. And I think that's one of the largest benefits that we currently have, both industry and as well as personally, is now before I go to write a document, I go to Chat GPT and I ask for a template, or I ask for some guidance. I ask for that collated information and knowledge to be presented to me versus, I've got to dream up at a meeting agenda. Well, I feed that in and I ask for what's out there in that knowledge base, and then I can validate it. So I think that's the benefit, and that's what we did at that session. And frankly, there was a great number of people in that session that came back and said, wow, that was amazing. I hadn't thought about using it this way, or I hadn't considered how we could do that. And of course, you also got the, well, I don't want to put my data in the cloud and I don't want to send my data. And, you got all the sort of risk adverse people talking as well. But this is the future now. Like SAP is embedding, they've got a partnership with IBM called Joule that they're embedding in SAP. Adobe just yesterday offered me or wanted me to restart because they've embedded some Chat GPT connection or something similar. So like you say, every day there's something.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. Two things kind of come to mind there. First of all, should Norm versus Chat GPT, who won there?
Well, the interesting thing was that we asked it some very specific SAP questions around configuration, and it answered them way more detailed than I could, right? Way more detailed. It doesn't have the human element of experience, though.
And it doesn't have the bright shirts either.
That's correct.
Right. Okay. And then, so one of the things that you said was about people using ChatGPT at work. I just saw a stat maybe a week ago. I wish I had the actual numbers in there, but it was surprising how many people are now using ChatGPT at work, but not in a public way, right? They're using ChatGPT at work without their employers knowing about it.
Right.
And I think that's probably one of the things that we're going to start to see a lot more, right? People using these tools, but not using them in a secure way because their employer does want to, or they're afraid of it, or there's some policies that go against it. to protect data or to protect privacy or whatever that might be, but it's going to happen pretty quick. What are your thoughts on that, Norm?
Well, of course. I mean, the likelihood of somebody having a strategy in place as a corporation today to manage the use of Chat GPT and ensure the integrity of the data that's being shared or the information that's being shared is arguably pretty low, unless you started work on something like that 3 or 4 or maybe 5 years ago. So maybe the large companies that saw that coming, that had a CIO, CTO role or a board that put emphasis on that, has that in place and was able to respond. I think other companies have simply added a sentence maybe to their policy or to their IT architecture to say, we don't connect to Chat GPT from inside the firewall. Or if you're a small company, mid-sized or even smaller, maybe even you're run by a family, it's been a family business for years that is maybe stale-wartish in nature when it comes to technology. Well, I'm not sure that they even know how to respond to it. And so some of those folks, I fear, are at risk of really lagging behind because they cannot react quickly enough and aren't well educated in the space to know how to react. I think that's a big challenge, honestly.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've seen historically companies don't react fast enough when it comes to technology. This is one where I think they need to react really fast because the people using it, I mean, it's so powerful. There's so many potential good use cases for it that people are just going to do it whether they're allowed to do it or not. I was very surprised. I'll try to find the research. I'll send it your way, but I was very surprised at how many were using it without their employer kind of knowing about it. And it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, and even the schools, how have the schools responded? They had to respond in a heartbeat to students, right? And so that's not possible. We know that, governmental, public organizations like that can't respond quickly. They're just not nimble enough. They don't have the resources. They're not strategic in nature oftentimes. So I think that's a real challenge. But yeah, I'm curious to see those stats because I'm sure it's massive. Like I think when you go to OpenAI, it tells you how many users, or in one screen it happens to. I can't remember where it shows that, or it used to. And it's astounding how many people have signed up for that service.
Yeah, and how many more will continue, man. So, Norm versus ChatGPT, there was a competition, but it sounds like now it's not about compete, but it's about complete. And it sounds like ChatGPT has completed you. Chris, you want to say that?
Well, yeah, I can't really remember how we summed it up. I mean, it was more to the effect of, this is a tool and this is something that's valuable to each and every one of us in some way, and go out and explore, go out and learn and try and test it and look for. I've always hated this term in IT, use cases for ChatGPT. But if you do nothing, you're definitely going to fall behind. And it's astounding to see how quickly Microsoft, Google, SAP, everybody pivoted to have some type of interface connection or association to these generative transformers, right? These tools that will take large language models and provide, or large data models and provide insights to them. So,
yeah, that's interesting, man. So obviously things have evolved quite a bit. And you're in the asset management space. And just for our listeners, right, when we talk asset management, we're not talking about financial instruments, right? We're talking the big assets, right? Facilities, right? Like, pipelines, infrastructure, like those sorts of assets. Managing those, right? The maintenance, the operations, the reliability, right? The planning, the scheduling, all of that stuff. Now, let me ask you this, Norm. What trends do you foresee in an asset management? with the continuous evolution of AI? And how should businesses prepare to adapt?
Well, I don't think we have to just limit it to asset management per se, because we're experiencing it in our consumer lives as well, right? So if you want to draw more comparison to make sure your listeners understand what asset management is, let's talk about our personal stuff, right? So our fridges, our stoves, our houses, our cars, we're seeing, of course, more and more sensors going into those devices in our homes, and subsequently then we're getting insights back from, power usage, or do you need milk, or, what is going on in your house. So that's exactly the same thing that's happening in industry, in that there are more and more sensors. That's another good stat to go look for. I can't remember the number of IoT devices, or Internet of Things devices, connected to the internet off of equipment, I'll put that in quotes, has exploded over the last few years, right? And there's two segregations between that. There's the IoT device, which is your Nest thermostat in your house that you can connect your app to, or your digital lock on the front door that you can connect to. And then there's the industrial Internet of Things, which are devices that have sensors on them behind the firewall in industry, that may or may not connect out to the public cloud, so to speak, for security or proprietary reasons. But that continues to be the push, and unfortunately, a lot of it's being driven by the lack of resources. I had a call with a water company just yesterday, where they put out a job posting for a water operator, and that would mean you're going to go into a water plant and you're going to operate the equipment and monitor the production of water, which is highly regulated, and obviously we have to protect the water source, right? They don't get any responses to those job postings. And so then if you don't have the human to do the work, how do you alleviate that gap? Well, you automate. So automate means you have to take advantage of sensor data. You're going to have to take advantage of AI automation techniques, if you wish. You're going to have to somehow use mechanization or technology to eradicate the human position. So the push in my industry is sensor data. How do we predict what? Oh, I just did the thumbs up. That's funny. How do you predict the machinery failing, and how do you prevent it? How do you be proactive? And arguably, that's what's happened. Tesla does a download of updates to the software system in a Tesla. Same concept. They're constantly monitoring that car. They're capturing road data. They're capturing driving data. They're feeding that back. Google is using our phones to update maps. Every time we drive, it's updating the map. That's how it keeps it up to date. And consumers expect that, right? If the map isn't correct from Google, or our GPS takes us to the wrong location, we don't accept that. Industry is lagging behind that, but they're being forced, just based on labor and costs, to more automation, and then more analytics using artificial, in quotes, technologies, right? To come up with that information and come up with those intelligences. So, it's a weird time. It's a very weird time, because everybody's trying to do it, and it's very difficult. It still relies on foundational data being accurate, a quantity and a quality of data that's acceptable to an if-then-else statement, right?
Right. So let me ask you this, Norm, right? Because one of the things that you've done tremendously well throughout your career is help organizations essentially set up the data structures for their systems, right? And it's one thing that you bored me with the first time you were kind of talking about it. I remember you showing me on the whiteboard how everything works. I'm like, I don't care about this. Never going to use it in my life. One of the most valuable things that I learned very early on in my career, right? And I didn't kind of appreciate it back then. But that's one thing that your career has been, you've been very successful in your career for. So companies don't understand how important it is to set up that initial system structure, right? The master data, like how everything's kind of going to flow, the various taxonomies. Now it's going to be even more important than it ever has been, right? At least for those companies that want to leverage that, they need to have those structures in place. They need to be defined well. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and maybe what companies should be thinking about when they're redesigning or resetting up certain systems so that they can be compatible with artificial intelligence tools?
Sure. That's a big topic. We could probably talk for an hour and I could get a whiteboard out and I could bore everybody to death. But, unfortunately, I think there's a human condition that takes things for granted, and maybe it's our inherent laziness, which just assumes that because things work, they should always work, or there was not really a great deal of effort went into them, or something to that effect. But I'll go back to the map example again, because I think that's the most connected to each and every one of us of any example I could probably give. If I move into a house in Calgary, let's use Calgary as an example because it's a quadrant city. If I move into a house in Calgary and I don't like my house number and I don't like my street name, I just don't go out and change that. Like if I don't like it's 968, I don't change it to 999. And I don't like the fact it ends in, avenue or place or close or whatever, I don't go change the street sign, because if I do, well, for one, nothing is going to happen because the inherent foundation of mapping is so deeply entrenched in the fundamentals of the earth, if you wish, that it wouldn't work. And two, if I did that, well, my mail would never get to me if I had delivery to my house, because Amazon wouldn't get to me, et cetera, right? But in industry and in our professional lives, in many cases, we don't have control over that addressing system. So a company will implement SAP or JD Edwards or Oracle or Microsoft Dynamics or whatever, and they allow it to be an island unto itself. And then within it, they allow islands of data. And then you've got engineering data and you've got other departments that aren't using that system, and they come up with all their own addressing and naming convention. If we think about maps, though, maps don't allow that. Maps don't allow for that address to be changed or for that naming convention to be changed, right? If I tell you to go to 7th Avenue and 7th Street in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, well, I sent you to 4 places, but you'd likely immediately recognize that I didn't say Southwest, being that it's a quadrant city, right? Which is the old Nexon address. But in every organization I've ever worked in, and it's been really frustrating, is that they allow that breakage of the address. And so when we look at information, it will magnetically attract to an address. And again, using that 7th Ave, 7th Street, Southwest location, we can go on Google Maps, we can see the businesses around it, we can see the streets, we can go to Street View, we can see recent images of it, we can likely see reviews of the restaurants, reviews of the buildings, news associated to it. If we want to drill far enough, we can see tax information, street repairs, etc. Like everything magnetically attracts to that, just like it does to your home address, because that's where everything flows to, or organically. That's how it worked. right? Even the universe is structured that way from a planetary system and a solar system and a universe perspective. We want to go far enough. But get to an organization and turn somebody loose that doesn't understand addressing that's going to create data. Think about all the years you spent filing documents into a folder structure on a shared drive, right? It's chaos because everybody thinks differently about that. Go to the library. What keeps a library organized? It's a Dewey Decimal System, right? We don't have that architecture thinking in organizations. So that's the first problem.
And then let me build on that, Norm, right? So do you think the problem there is it's obviously a people problem, right? Now, my question to you is it a lack of education where people are not aware and understand the importance and how everything connects? Or is it a lack of discipline where they may understand, but they want it different and they say, fuck it, I'm going to do it this way? What do you think is more?
I didn't know we could swear on this podcast. That's awesome.
You say whatever you want, man.
Okay. Well, it's all of the above, plus it's a degree of laziness, right? Again, that inherent human condition. So if I feel that my background, because I did some programming early on and because I learned about databases, it's plain as day to me that I can't really accomplish anything unless I structure that data in a way that I can connect to it. And in database terms, it's called a concatenated key or a foreign key where you join things together by related information. So, 7th Street, 7th Ave, Southwest, Calgary, Alberta, Canada, with a postal code is a concatenated address that's unique and doesn't exist anywhere else, right? When we get to an organization and we name a file folder something, well, it's easily repeatable. Somebody else can duplicate that someplace else. There's no check. There's no referential integrity check. And, for those of you that don't know what referential integrity is, it's a good, go look it up. But the integrity between the data isn't there. So when we get to a large data model, now this starts to degrade this theory a little bit because large models can be very abstract. They don't have to have perfect indexes, but it takes a lot longer to train that model when you have to validate everything. So, there's the supervised training and the unsupervised training, and where my organization is at and where we are with organizations that we're working with is we're having to train their models for the algorithm to come out with a statistically accurate result because the underlying foundational indexes and addresses are congruent with each other. So that, although it's probably one day not going to be necessary because we'll probably have enough data that we can sort all that out. There's only so many ways to do things and there's only so many combinations. It's like solving the Rubik's Cube, just a large Rubik's Cube. But today, where we're at with technology and understanding and use is that those indexes that are broken or those addresses that are broken become outliers of data that create a lot of human work to intervene, to train, to say, yeah, that's a valid record, or potentially to go out and have to physically look and see, right? Like back to my example of changing the address. So had I changed the address of my house and then I phoned the city and said, hey, I never get my mail or the GPS doesn't work. Well, somebody's going to have to come look. So that's a lot of work, right? Whereas if we are constantly thinking about addressing and maintaining that continuity through our data and letting it magnetically attract, concatenate, then those algorithms and AI tools can, I think, be much, much more effective.
That's interesting. I always like hearing the data perspective from you on that front, right? Now here's a question I have for you, right? So you work with a lot of big organizations, right? Really, really big organizations when it comes to asset management. Now, businesses that are either big or small, doesn't really matter, but that are the early stages of, okay, I see promise in AI. It sounds like you're pretty bullish on AI. I'm obviously super bullish on AI, kind of going all in with it from an entrepreneurial standpoint. But those companies that are just starting to say, okay, I'm going to make it's not, I'm not going all in on it. It's a small mental commitment and organization commitment that I'm going to make towards AI. And they're asset management driven organizations, right? What are some of the initial things that you think, the initial steps that they should consider and that they should kind of go through before they really dive in?
Well, when I started programming, the first thing I ever did was the Hello World program, which you basically learn how to, print out Hello World on the screen. And I think if you're going to embark on the AI journey, then you're going to start with something that's very small, but provable. Something that you could do manually, that you can have AI do, but that you can also prove. And so pick a data set that is reasonable in size, because you need a certain amount of data for the isolation forest algorithm to work, and you need a certain data series, and there's all these parameters around that. So pick something that will work and start testing it and see what you get back, because you might be surprised. You might get nothing back, or you might have had a hunch that data contained information that if you could get would be really valuable to you. And if you can get a nugget back, then you can expand from that. But you're going to have to validate it, right? That's the difference. As I mentioned earlier, no longer should we really have to have people be data entry people. We should have people that are data validators. And that's a big difference from a value proposition perspective. So I'll give you an example. Where we're focused right now is equipment history, so service and repair history, preventive maintenance history, operational context. So how did that piece of equipment operate over time? What were its temperatures and pressures and what happened? And then trying to glue all of that together to look for patterns, because we believe there's patterns in that data. Then comparing oil analysis. So every so often on equipment that has oil in it, like a combustion engine or a gearbox or something like that, we're sampling oil. We're comparing those results against the other stuff. We're looking at what materials were consumed and what manufacturing process manufactured those materials, because maybe there's defects in the materials. And we're just trying to glue data. Again, we're trying to concatenate data on to that address till we see a pattern. We're going to include the weather. I want to include the people's behavior. I want to include the process in the organization. Well, who created the PO that bought the parts? Who did the service on that equipment? When was their last sick day? When was their last vacation day? Right? There's so many factors. And that's the value of a tool such as AI, in that we can feed it large, unrelated data, and unrelated meaning different context, but related via an address, and say, what does this look like? And it's going to run on it until it comes back with a pattern that makes sense, or until it comes back with outliers that then you can go investigate. Or if you're asking it the right question, it might come back with a solution that says, hey, when this happens, you need to change oil, or hey, when this happens, you need to slow down, or, and that's arguably what's happening with self-driving technology, right? They have mounds of data. Here's what happens when it's this speed, this temperature, this road condition, this road. So the car can adjust quickly based on patterns it's already seen. And that's really the simplest way I think I can describe it. But you got to figure out where is that spot organization to look those patterns.
So you're basically saying like, okay, start with something that's low risk. Start with something that's small. Start with something you can get to the end and validate that it works. Which I agree with you, right? I mean, I think we've seen that any digital transformations that we've done in the past, the ones where they're the most successful is you have this balance of incremental wins, right? The quick things that you use to generate that momentum, right? You validate kind of near the end, you show value, but then you've got the step changes, the things that dramatically change performance. And you need a combination of both, right? So you're saying don't start with the big stuff, start with the small stuff. If things out well,
double thumbs. Then you're getting in. That's with what?
I don't know where that came from, man. I don't know if your webcam or let's see if it does it for me. It doesn't do it for me. So, but that's basically kind of what you're saying there, right? Like start small, validate till the end, and then use that to find other use cases, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've grown up with that methodology because back in the day, you wrote your program, you did your program manually. If you could do it manually, then you could automate it. We're a little beyond that, but I think because there's distrust, right? Not many people believe that, I mean, the algorithms that we're faced with on social media certainly predict what we want to see, but that's because Siri's listening to us and things are happening, right? So I don't think we trust that in our industrial or our professional lives at work, that some computer can tell us when something's going to happen or how to do something. And I mean, it can support us today. I think people are open to, hey, here's a suggestion, kind of like you get when you go on Amazon and you buy a smoke detector and it says, hey, you should buy a carbon monoxide detector too. Okay, well, I can get my head wrapped around that. I can get the logic behind that. And by the way, there's been, 5,000 people in the last month did the exact same thing. Okay, it must be a good idea and it must make sense. But to have that happen in your job where, a month ago you were making those decisions to now your managers come along and said, well, we're going to implement AI and it's going to tell us what to do. I think that's a bit of a stretch. So pick something that is absorbable or palatable for the organization and the people within it. I think that's the only way. And I mean, I don't know. I don't have any really good AI stories other than the ones that I've told. Like I'm not seeing in my industry anyway, there's not a truckload of people coming to conferences or coming out of the woodwork saying, well, we did this with AI, right? Even SAP has groups that are working on AI, but where are the stories? Where are the actual customers that have done something and churned that out? Certainly in high margin, very profitable businesses like social media or companies that are dealing with human behaviors, we're seeing what's happening with the algorithms, right? But in professional industrial cases, it's not that prevalent yet. So I think we have to start small because I think we're doubters. We've always done it this way. We've always gotten a certain result. Now you want me to trust something else.
Right. That's good, Norm. So let me ask you one final question, right? So you've been very helpful in my career, sort of pushing and helping me push the boundaries, right? And think different, which I'm obviously very grateful to you for. Now, you've mentored and worked alongside many professionals, right? So what's one piece of advice that you would find yourself constantly offering about embracing technology?
Maybe I'll try to wrap it up into one, but I believe if you've never taken a programming course or you've never taken a database course and you are trying to apply some of these technologies, you're likely, you need a little more education. So I think you have to learn. I think you have to do some learning. be curious about it. And I think you have to have some personal reason for doing so, right? Like if you're faced with you're going to log into Chat GPT as an example, it's a blank screen. What are you going to ask it, right? And I think, I suspect there's people out there that just all day long have a conversation with Chat GPT, because you can, right? You can treat it like a entity and be nice to it and compliment it, and you can set it up so that, it takes on your persona as well, and it responds in a way you want to be responded to. So I think it's a combination of learning and having a basic understanding of the principles of what's going on, and then exploring and learning and constantly being curious about it. Otherwise there's no point to it, right?
Right. That theme of curiosity is something that we keep hearing over and over and over again.
Yeah. And maybe just to add to that, Yasin, like I think we're in this type of business, and certain people are in this type of business because they're problem solvers. And they like the problem. They like to unpack the problem and come up with a solution, right? I always say, if you said to me, hey, here's a brand new Ferrari, it might be brand new Ferrari Enzo. Do you want that? Or do you want this smashed up Corvette over here? And I go, oh, I want the smashed up Corvette, right? Because I want to fix it. I want to take it apart. How did they do this? How can I straighten this out? How can I put it back together and make it so? And I think if you have that sort of aptitude or problem solving thinking, then I think there's a lot of opportunity. There's a ton of opportunity in this space. I shouldn't say a lot. There's a ton. It's endless.
Yeah, that's a good point, Norm. I would take the Enzo, right? But I see where you're going with that in terms of problem solving, man. So that's awesome. Look, Norm, thank you so much for coming on the show, right? It's been great chatting with you. I feel like, we do these chats all the time over beer, typically, right? So I think we'll have you back on the show at some point. But everybody that's been watching, thank you guys for listening, right? We're obviously very excited about the show, being able to have different conversations and just get the perspective of different people, right? In terms of what they think about AI, how they think it's going to shape our future, and how it's going to shape organizations and our personal lives. I think next time we bring you on the show, let's talk more about the personal side of things. I think that there's a lot of interesting applications. I'm one of those people that talks to ChatGPT and Copilot basically the entire day, man. Yeah. Right? And that's probably one of the biggest benefits that I get. It's like, for me, I like to problem solve, but I like to do it with other people and talk to people and get on a whiteboard, facilitate things and all of this kind of stuff. Now, I mean, I can do it at any time, right? If I wake up at 4 a.m, I can start doing it with ChatGPT. If I'm, going to bed late and I've got the spur of creativity and inspiration, I can go ahead and do that. And it's always there. It gasses me up when I need some gassing up, right? And I think a lot of people can benefit from it. So I like the theme of exploration. I like the theme that you're talking about, curiosity and just playing with it and starting small. I think that's some good advice that a lot of people and organizations can take. So, guys, thank you so much for joining us. We're always looking for feedback in terms of how to improve the show, what you would want to hear, what you would want to have us on the show. And we need a name, right? We will continue to be nameless because that will not slow us down. But yes, thank you, Garland. Help us title our show. That's it, everybody.
Thanks, Alice.
Cheers, Norm.